As you know, India is the largest client of AIIB. So for us to have this opportunity to present actually the first flagship report since I joined the AIIB, and to have this opportunity to do this at this very influential institution is very attractive. So without further ado, I would like to start the presentation, and you have understood that this is about global value chains and as levers to sustainable development, and that will be the theme that I will try to develop, but hopefully connected to discussions and the controversies that Suman alluded to in his introduction. So as you said, you know, it's been an ambition from India for a long time to expand its exports, and you know, there are many reasons why you want to expand exports. You know, you get exposed to international competition, you have a larger market to defray your costs of R&D and marketing and so on. There are many other reasons why you want to join exports, but if you look at the achievements, it's a bit mixed. So India has managed to increase its share of exports, but it has not done so much of that when it comes to, or it's not as prominent when it comes to global value chain export as it is to non-GVC exports. And let me say that this is, so even though India's share has increased a little bit, it really lags many other emerging economies. And what really happened in the last, particularly in the last 10 years, but even if you look over a longer period, the last 30 years, you can see that what global value chains have been able to do is to bring in many new countries into a global production engagement. And of course, that has happened to some extent at the expense of advanced economies, but of course the total trade volume has also increased a lot over this period. So, but the pattern is clear. Emerging economies, and it's not only about China; it's many other emerging economies have managed to use global value chains as a lever of development. And of course, and this is going to be an important part of this presentation, is that, you know, connecting to these global value chains is important, and it's have become easier because today you don't have to produce a whole car. You can produce a small component and still be part of these global value chains. But in order to do so, you need to think about infrastructure as well. And coming from a bank that is mostly investing in infrastructure, it's particularly important to think about how can we be part of facilitating for more countries and countries that are already part of these production chains to maintain them and expand their engagement. And so even if we have seen overall a slowdown in this very rapid expansion of global value chains in terms of share of total export, the really dominant pattern, as I said before, is that this shift from advanced to emerging economies. But there are many challenges for these value chains, and we have seen, of course, no one can have missed the attention that global value chains have received in media, and you know, we see this in terms of disruptions, dislocations in value chains. We see it in terms of long waiting lines to buy a car, or to very rapid increases in shipping costs and so on. All this coming from mostly from the reopening, maybe less so from the initial lockdowns, but the uneven reopening and also the very large stimulus that have increased demand and put extreme pressures on these global value chains. So the pandemic shock is clearly something that is now forcing a lot of companies to rethink their global value chains, and we can come back maybe to that in the discussion. It will not be my focus today. And of course, trade tension and policy will also and will have a major impact, particularly I think for high-tech goods. It's not going to be the focus of my presentation either, but we can come back to that. Technological change, so digital infrastructure and the like will have a major impact. But what I will argue towards the end is that compared to these other challenges, the major impact and the major determinant of where will we see production, to what extent will products be shipped across continents, and to what extent where will production happen, all that will be influenced tremendously by the net zero transition, and that's where I'm going to end up in this presentation. But let me first say a few words about what we mean by the global value chain. I've taken this picture from the World Development Report from a couple of years ago, the 2020 one, which gave a very thorough assessment of global value chains and a lot of interesting material there. But it happened before the pandemic, and it happened also, I would argue, before we started understanding the impact that the net zero transition will have on global value chains. But what I think this picture illustrates is that even for something as simple, relatively simple as a bicycle, the components come from many different places, and they are, of course, eventually assembled into a bicycle, but they require shipments across borders. There are some different definitions. We don't need to deal with them right now, but we think of global value chain exports as those that cross borders at least twice. And I would say in many cases we're talking about many times that components cross borders before they are finally assembled in a car or a bicycle. And when we think about global value chains, there's a lot of emphasis, of course, of trying to produce, more high-end or final products. But actually, what really matters is your ability to extract productivity gains from specific activities along the value chain. So it's not for sure that you want to move up and take, produce more of your intermediate goods like China has done. That's been China's strategy, is to upgrade and of course get more activity in the high-tech sector, but also taking more and more of its intermediate goods inside China. And of course some of that are also moving out some high labor content production to other countries in Asia in particular. India has chosen another route, which is much more focused on adding value to specific activities and of course integrating ICT in its exports, and that is a strategy that other countries also have managed to pursue, and so there's nothing bad or good about going either way. What matters in the end is how much you can increase your productivity, because that's going to determine your long-term growth. So let me talk a little bit about India here, because the report is not only about India; it's about all of Asia and, in a sense, also all the world. But we have a particular chapter on India, and we have a particular chapter on China. But I'm going to focus on the India chapter and our conclusions relative to India, because I think that's where your interest mainly is. So if you look at you can see that if you compare 2000 to 2019, there's an impressive increase in terms of high-tech manufacturing, and maybe not to some extent at the expense of business services and also at some low-tech manufacturing. If you look at some opportunities that have been emerging particularly in labor-intensive manufacturing, some of this has moved out of China, but also some countries have managed to really exploit these opportunities. If you look at the sort of well-known expansion of textiles in Bangladesh, but also leather in Vietnam. So these are countries that have managed to attract new activities and expand very rapidly in individual sectors. So it doesn't have to be at all just high tech. These have been very productive from these countries to engage in these global value chains in textiles and leather. So what is the relationship to infrastructure? Well, the first thing, and it's not a surprise perhaps, that you need a certain basic infrastructure before you can join GVCs. But once you have established that, so there's probably a lot of that is sort of basic transportation infrastructure and basic power, access to power and reliable power. That is kind of the entry point. But then as you improve your infrastructure, you also have more opportunities to participate in GVCs. And sometimes the direction of causality can go the other way, that, you know, because of GVC participation, you are sort of forced to expand and improve your infrastructure. And of course, you want to exploit both those forces. And here, just a comparison to China, because as I said, they've chosen quite different strategies. But if there's one thing that I take away from the Chinese experience, is that it has managed to engage, you know, many parts of the country, and particularly parts of the country that historically have been very difficult to develop for China. The interior, particularly places like Chongqing and Chengdu in Sichuan, those places have, because of access to new infrastructure, been able to develop into high-tech centers that are very much connected to global value chains. And so that is very much a lesson from the Chinese experience. If you look at India, you can see that still, and this is well known for all of you, of course, but when you look at as an outsider, it's really striking how India's exports are concentrated to a few states. It has actually become slightly more spread out in the last 10, 15 years, but it's still dominated by a few states. And of course, when you look at the transport connectivity and the power infrastructure in those states, they're very much also the most developed states that have access to these global value chains. And something we looked particularly at and found very interesting and something we want to pursue going forward is to understand how these transportation networks around ports in India, how they affect exports in general, but particularly the ability to engage in global value chains. And there's a lot of variation across different ports in India, and here you have, you know, some of them, and you would know them much better than I would, but it is striking this difference when it comes to, you know, how far can you engage, or how long does it take for you to get to, or how far can you get within a given time unit away from the ports, and it's a lot of variation here. And this matters because there's a very strong correlation between the sort of port level exports and the number of factories within the 2 to 4 hour isochrones. So isochrones is the time within how far you get within 2 hours, in 4 hours, and so on. And this correlation declines very strongly after 4 hours. So 6 hours and 8 hours away from the port, it's much more difficult to engage in global value chains. And so when you're a country, so this is not just about India, it's about any country that wants to engage in global value chains, have to think about, should we pursue policies that focus only on global value chains, or should we focus on policies that are sort of GVC neutral, that supports the entire economy? And should we focus on policies that are specific to one place, for example, you know, a particular city or a particular harbor, or should we focus on policies that are more place neutral? And countries around Asia and also India has tried several of these strategies. It's about special economic zones, which are very often focused on attracting DVC investment. Of course, they're tied to a particular place. You can offer, transport maybe more effectively within a particular area and so on. But, another strategy which also India has pursued and with some success is to try to improve institutional quality more generally in a state and across state and improving the business environment. So these are just a very simple conceptual framework for thinking about different policies you can think of pursuing if you want to use infrastructure as a way to attract or place infrastructure in a more general policy to attract global value chains. So let me, I said I was going to come to the end to what I think is the number one challenge for global value chains. And that's going to have an impact for sure in Asia going forward and will certainly impact India. And then that is the next frontier, the net zero transition. So I think we all know what is needed. We need renewable energy production. We need more trade in renewable energy. We need to establish carbon markets. We need to make sure that there is different grids are connected and so on. We need to exploit green comparative advantage. Maybe this comes from renewables. Maybe this comes from better transportation systems. And we need to think about how we can use international governance like the just finished COP26 or the COP process to try to drive this development. But what we wanted to focus on specifically was the role of the firms that lead these global value chains, because they are coming under increasing pressures from shareholders, from civil society organizations, increasingly from their banks, that they need to bring down climate risk or decarbonize throughout the value chain, just not in their immediate carbon footprint. They need to look at the whole value chain. And that is a very interesting, of course, it's a challenge for the global value chains, but it's also an opportunity for the rest of the world to try to find new ways of achieving decarbonization across countries and across sectors. We don't have many tools for that. In that way, it is there's a lot of interesting opportunities here to work with these lead firms to get progress towards net zero. Of course, the other side of this is that host governments that want to attract or want to retain DVC investment, they can offer decarbonization opportunities exactly in those areas that we were talking about: renewable energy, efficient, effective multimodal green transport systems, and so on. And this provides very strong incentives. I was talking the other day to finance ministers in the Arab world, and for them, they have tried for decades to attract this sort of high tech, high value added economic activities. But now, because of these very sizable renewable energy sources that they have access to, maybe there's new opportunities for them to become part of these global value chains. But then the same thing for India. India has done amazing investments in renewable energy over the last few years, and that can become a very attractive decarbonization opportunities for both for Indian companies, but also for DVC lead firms. So I think I'll stop there, and I look forward very much to the discussion. Here's the link to the report, and it's available on the AIIB website. So thank you. Over to you, Suman.